The narrative of Jeremiah Liver-Eating Johnson is intricately linked to the harsh and relentless terrains of the American West. His journey, which began with his desertion from the U.S. Navy, evolved into a remarkable saga as a mountain man, sharpshooter, and a legendary figure of the frontier. Johnson's life exemplifies the harsh realities and tenacity of his time. His adventures, a blend of truth and legend, depict a man who adeptly navigated the shifting wilderness, formed unexpected partnerships, and emerged as an emblem of frontier justice and retribution. This exploration of Johnson's life includes his notorious vendetta against the Crow tribe and the lasting impact of his story that continues to intrigue our shared consciousness. Although record-keeping in the 1800s was often unreliable, historians estimate that Johnson, born John Jeremiah Garrison on July 1, 1824, in Little York, Unnerdon County, New Jersey, did not remain there for long. After leaving, he developed into a formidable presence, standing at 6 feet 2 inches and weighing approximately 260 pounds, significantly taller and heavier than the average man of his era, who typically measured around 5 feet 6 inches. At the start of the Mexican-American War, Johnson, still a teenager, enlisted in the Navy despite being underage, serving aboard a warship until an incident involving an officer led to his decision to flee rather than face disciplinary action. The circumstances surrounding this confrontation are unclear, but it undoubtedly marked a pivotal moment in his life. Upon docking, Johnson chose to escape rather than risk punishment from the Navy, believing he would have a better chance of survival in the wilderness than in a military prison. To avoid detection, he adopted the name John Johnson and relocated far from his roots. However, his imposing physique made it challenging for him to remain inconspicuous. He leveraged his size and strength to work as a wood hog, providing wood for steamboats. After exploring a career in shipbuilding, he eventually arrived in the Montana Territory, where tales of gold ignited the aspirations of many, including himself, during the Old West period. Johnson chose the Older Gulch, Montana, a place where gold mining was a prevalent lifestyle, unlike anything he had previously experienced. Once the initial excitement of the glittering gold faded, Johnson recognized that his true vocation on the frontier was to become a mountain man. Eager to embrace the life of a trapper and hunter, he sought to learn vital survival skills. He encountered the seasoned mountain man, John Hatcher, who took him under his guidance. Hatcher, a notable figure despite his solitary existence, welcomed Johnson to his cabin by the Little Snake River in northern Colorado. There, Hatcher imparted essential survival skills, including hunting with a hawk and rifle, igniting campfires with sticks, and steering clear of perilous wildlife such as bears and rattlesnakes. Johnson also mastered the art of setting traps, gathering furs, and bartering for supplies, demonstrating his aptitude as a student. Around 1847, Hatcher decided to retire from his mountain man lifestyle and journeyed east, bidding farewell to his apprentice. Left to his own devices, Johnson yearned for companionship and a wife. The previous year, while traversing the Bitterroot Valley in Montana, he had formed a connection with the Flathead Indian tribe. An assistant chief from the tribe had proposed his daughter in exchange for some furs, which Johnson found to be a fair trade. Upon learning of Hatcher's departure, Johnson returned to the Bitterroot Valley to see if the offer still stood. It did, and soon after, Johnson and his new bride were making their way back to his cabin along the Little Snake River. By the onset of autumn, the couple had settled into their new home. In the following weeks, Johnson prepared the cabin with sufficient food and supplies for his wife, as he would need to leave her alone throughout the winter while he engaged in fur trapping. He instructed her on the use of his rifle for self-defense, and in exchange, she taught him her native Salish language. Unbeknownst to Johnson, she also became pregnant around the same time. Confident in her safety, he left with a solemn promise to return the following spring. However, when Johnson returned to the cabin weeks later, he was confronted with a horrifying sight. The door of the charred and smoldering cabin stood ajar, revealing the skeletal remains of his wife, who had succumbed to the brutal winter elements and predatory wildlife. From the evidence, Johnson inferred that she had been murdered by members of the Crow tribe, another group of Native Americans in the area. Among the remains, he found a small, delicate skull beneath his wife's rib cage, indicating that she had been pregnant at the time of her death. Overwhelmed with rage and a fierce determination, Johnson vowed to avenge her murder and set out to hunt down and kill those responsible. The brutal killing of Johnson's wife and unborn child not only filled him with fury, but also drastically changed the course of his life. Shortly thereafter, the bodies of scalped Crow warriors began to appear throughout the region, discovered by both fellow tribesmen and white mountain men. These victims were not only scalped, but also had their livers removed. As the number of these gruesome findings increased, other mountain men concluded that Johnson was on a vengeful killing spree against the Crow tribe. It became evident that Johnson was the perpetrator, and he was reportedly consuming the livers of the Crow. Historians estimate that this liver-eating Johnson killed over 300 Crow during his decade-long rampage. Eventually, the Crow chiefs, frustrated by their losses, assembled an elite group of their 20 strongest warriors to track down and eliminate Johnson. However, none of these warriors ever returned, leading to speculation that they too fell victim to Johnson. In Crow culture, the liver is considered essential for entering the afterlife. By consuming the livers of his victims, Johnson not only terminated their earthly existence, but also doomed their spirits. His actions instilled profound fear in the Crow, creating a lasting legacy of terror and brutality. Biographers Raymond Thorpe and Robert Bunker, in their work Crow Killer, assert that Johnson's spree of killings was fueled by a passion for murder. They recount a chilling incident where he poisoned and murdered 29 Blackfeet warriors using biscuits laced with strychnine as a grotesque form of amusement. One particular legend, possibly inspired by such events, narrates Johnson's audacious escape from a band of Blackfoot warriors. During a winter trek exceeding 500 miles to sell whiskey to the Flathead tribe, Johnson was ambushed by the Blackfoot, who aimed to sell him to the Crow. Stripped to the waist and bound with leather cords, he was left under the watch of a single warrior in a teepee. Johnson managed to free himself, incapacitate the guard with a kick, and use the guard's own knife against him. He even severed the guard's leg, subsequently smoking the flesh into jerky. Johnson then fled into the wilderness, ultimately reaching the cabin of his trapping partner, Delgu, after a grueling 200-mile journey. At that juncture in history, the West was experiencing significant transformations. The buffalo population was declining, fur trapping ceased due to the depletion of beaver, and much of the large game that once roamed the land had become scarce. Native tribes suffered devastation as their territories were seized, and their people were confined to reservations. After a quarter-century of unrelenting conflict with the Crow, Johnson and the tribe finally established peace. When Johnson and the Crow ultimately reconciled, the tribe underwent a complete transformation, embracing him as one of their own. His long-standing feud with them, which had resulted in numerous fatalities, officially concluded. Nevertheless, the West remained a violent and contested area, particularly during the Plains Indian Wars of the mid-19th century. A multitude of Native Americans from diverse tribes, especially the Sioux and Blackfoot, faced the formidable opposition of depict Saruka, known in English as Crow Killer, along with his fellow mountain men. Johnson adopted the harsh lifestyle of a mountain man even after his quest for vengeance concluded, primarily engaging in hunting and trapping for sustenance, while occasionally selling whiskey. In 1864, he enlisted with the 2nd Colorado Cavalry as a sharpshooter for the Union Army, and it appeared that his desertion from the U.S. Navy was either ignored or that the Union Army was genuinely in urgent need of recruits. Following the end of the Civil War in 1865, Johnson was honorably discharged. Upon returning to the West, he applied his tracking skills as an Army scout during the Indian Wars. Subsequently, he became deputy sheriff in Colson, Montana, and Leadville, Colorado, ultimately serving as the town marshal of Red Lodge, Montana. He also initiated an amateur Wild West show, traveling with Calamity Jane and recounting tales of his adventures and confrontations with Native Americans. In an article published in early 1878, the Washington Post erroneously reported Johnson's death, portraying him as a brutal frontiersman who killed Native Americans for sport or revenge. Other newspapers adopted his infamous nickname, Liver-Eating Johnson, and described his alleged actions as grotesque acts of cannibalism. Johnson's legend became so intertwined with violent folklore that distinguishing fact from fiction became unfeasible. He may have become ensnared in the web of his own embellished narratives, ultimately altering his own accounts of how he acquired his gruesome nickname and during newspaper interviews. In his later years, Johnson journeyed to the Golden State, a location far removed from his wilderness origins. Ironically, the man renowned for shunning civilization spent his final days in the Los Angeles Old Soldiers' Home in Southern California. He passed away destitute on January 21, 1900, at the age of 76, and was interred in a military cemetery in Los Angeles. For 75 years, he remained there as the City of Angels developed around him. In 1972, the film Jeremiah Johnson, featuring Robert Redford in the titular role, sparked renewed interest in his story. At that time, his grave was located next to the San Diego Freeway, a stark contrast to the life and legacy of liver-eating Johnson. 2 years later, following a campaign initiated by a teacher and 25 seventh-grade students, Johnson's remains were relocated to Cody, Wyoming, near the Shoshone River, a much more appropriate resting place for a legendary mountain man. His epitaph states, "No more trails." Throughout his life, Johnson undertook various roles to make a living, including sailor, scout, soldier, gold prospector, hunter, trapper, wood supplier, whiskey vendor, guide, deputy, constable, and log cabin builder. He crafted his own folklore, filled with tales that would grow larger than life itself, representing a microcosm of the Old West and the broader American frontier.